Okay, welcome back to American Stories through Music. So, throughout American history, people have used music to express their views on important social issues of the day. So, we want to explore how music has connected to critical social issues and American culture. So, as you know, YouTube doesn't allow you to play other YouTubes without consent. So, in the description box below, please find the associated music videos with this plan. And we're going to be talking about several different genres, including pop and rock, blues, R&B, country, folk. And we want to explore the importance of musical artists and genres within an historical context. So today we're going to look at colonial history from to the revolutionary times through music. Okay, so one of the things we want to take a look at is colonial dance. So music was critical to the favorite pastime for the early colonists. And one of the offshoots of that was dancing. And there's a huge repertoire of dance tunes. But in those early times, they were mostly English and Celtic reels, something called hornpipes, jigs, and minuets. Dancing was usually accompanied by a single violin. But for special occasions, there were maybe 4 or 5 musicians. So most of the dances fell into 2 main categories. Fancy dances such as the minuets and alamades and hornpipes, and country dances. And the country dances were simpler to learn, and they were more egalitarian, so that each dancing couple interacted with every other couple on the floor. So how about George Washington? Was George a good dancer? Yes. Actually, he was. Washington once described dancing as so agreeable and innocent an amusement. First-hand accounts say that he was extremely good at it and was always quite the center of attention. So during the colonial dances, the dance floor was the place where a person's command of the attributes of gentility, costume, manners, movement, grace, and ease were put to the ultimate and most public test. So dancing was very much part of our colonial and pre-revolutionary history, including George Washington. So from the Williamsburg Museum down in Virginia, they've created a sort of a street dance scene of colonial times. So that video is in the description box below, so please feel free to take a look at that. Okay, so we want to introduce other music that was here during colonial times, or started as a result of colonial times, and that is gospel music. So this is from the Hampton, Virginia Museum.gov, and it talks about the 1619 landing of Virginia's first Africans. So the Hampton Convention and Visitor Tourist Museum states that in late August 1619, 20 to 30 enslaved Africans landed at Point Comfort, today's Fort Monroe, in Hampton, Virginia, aboard the English privateer ship White Lion. So these slaves were actually on board a Spanish vessel that the English privateer ship had overtaken and taken off the Spanish ship, which they captured. So they take them to Virginia, and they were traded in exchange for supplies for their ship. Several days later, another ship, the Treasurer, arrived in Virginia with additional enslaved Africans. Both groups had been captured by English privateers from Spanish slave ships. And they are the first recorded Africans to arrive in England's mainland American colonies. The landing of the first Africans in Virginia is one of the most significant events we interpret. Although English colonists in Virginia didn't invent slavery, and the transition from a handful of bound African laborers to a legalized system of full-blown chattel slavery took many decades. 1619 marks the beginning of race-based bondage that defined the African American experience. So, along with the Africans, they, of course, brought their music and culture and religion. And it took a while, but eventually the African musical influence spans beyond the borders and traditional African music. It's been shaping music around the world for centuries, and it began with the diaspora of millions of Africans around the world during the slave trade. And it continued through the 20th and 21st century as people traveled to and from Africa. Now, today, as the world gets smaller with the internet and more listeners get exposed to new African artists, the evolution continues. Without Africa and the African diaspora, music across the globe wouldn't be what it is today. So the musical traditions from Africa that influenced music in America eventually leads to jazz. But it starts out as a kind of a gospel, it's called gospel music or church music, or spirituals. And of course, they were also kind of working music. They would sing as they worked, and chants coupled with makeshift instruments that eventually morphed into blues rhythms and ragtime. Again, ragtime paved the way for jazz, and elements of all these styles influence rock and roll and hip-hop music. This far-reaching African influence wove its way into some strange places. For example, the song Dixie was a beloved song in the American South and a favorite tune of many, including Abraham Lincoln. The Confederacy even adopted it as their national anthem during the Civil War. Little did many of the people whistling its tune realize it originated in minstrel shows of the 1850s, which imitated black music. So we have a video in the description box below of a famous gospel song called Down by the Riverside, also known as Ain't Gonna Study War No More, is an African-American spiritual. Its roots date back to before the American Civil War, though it was first published in 1918. Because of its pacifistic imagery, Down by the Riverside has also been used as an anti-war protest song, especially during the Vietnam War. So this is a gospel group, Clara Ward and the Wardsingers, singing Down by the Riverside, which you can find in the description box below. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about modern day gospel music that's taken on sort of a new form. And we saw this about 2 years ago in a song called The New Jerusalem. But it might surprise many, but Jerusalema is actually adapted from an old gospel hymn entitled Jerusalem, My Home. It can be found in the Methodist Church hymn book. The original hymn celebrates the promise of a new Jerusalem, a new heaven and a new earth, a restored cosmos of a city. The New Jerusalem, a day when God will once again dwell among his people. The original hymn reflects on this promise and hope. It expresses a prayerful longing for the New Jerusalem. The hymn describes a wonderful place of rest and salvation. There is no pain or sin. There are no more tears. The New Jerusalem is better than the Garden of Eden, for it is the permanent promised land where our present wandering will end. So that song, Jerusalema, came out late 2019, but really hit the charts in 2020. And along with it came a dance challenge. And this dance challenge to the song went global. So it became really kind of famous in Europe, in the Netherlands, Portugal, Italy, Romania, Spain, France, Jamaica, Canada, and the United States. And it's sort of been compared to the Spanish song, the Macarena, of about 20 years ago. So it started off when some German workers paid tribute to Berlin's Tegel airport. by dancing to Jerusalema on the tarmac of the now shut down terminal. Then the Swiss Federal Office of Police challenged the Irish Garda Police to the Jerusalema Dance Challenge, which they both accepted. The video was well received in the two countries, with the Swiss police flying the Irish flag at their headquarters for the day. So let's take a listen to Jerusalema. You can find it, the link in the description box below. Okay, so another influence that came from Africa with the slave trade was an instrument called a xylophone. And African villagers used the xylophone for various ceremonial purposes. Often villages used the xylophone in large orchestras or ensembles consisting of other wooden and gourd instruments. They played the instrument at tribal dances to reenact musically historical events or to pass along tribal tales. So if you look at the picture, you can see a little underneath those wooden pieces of wood is a plant that's dried out, and it's called a gourd. It might be something like a pumpkin or a squash. And as they dry out, if you hit it, it has a certain musical tone to it, depending on its size and shape. So they would put that underneath those pieces of wood on the string to give it some musical quality and tone to it. And this, of course, they didn't bring them from Africa because they didn't bring anything with them, but they were able to reconstruct them once they were here. Now, this instrument, the xylophone, eventually becomes part of jazz quartets. And a famous jazz musician, Lionel Hampton, we're going to listen to one of his songs called Flying Home that was published in 1957. So the xylophone he made it kind of fashionable to be added to jazz quartets as a sort of musical percussion instrument. So the song was reportedly developed while Lionel Hampton was in the Benny Goodman Band, and at a performance in 1939, after the performance required the band to fly to Los Angeles, from Los Angeles to Atlantic City. And it was the first time that Lionel Hampton had flown. And he began whistling this tune while waiting for the plane to take off. And Benny Goodman asked him, what is that? And Hampton said, I don't know, just whistling a tune. We can call it Flying Home, I guess. So Hampton later confessed that the tune was a way for him to keep his mind off the impending flight because he was afraid of flying. And the Goodman Quartet played the tune for the first time that night. Later that year, Goodman recorded the first version of the song, featuring a memorable solo from guitarist Charlie Christian. Hampton liked the song so much that it became his theme song once he left Benny Goodman's band and started his own band. So, in the description box below, take a listen to Lionel Hampton on the xylophone, Flying Home, 1957. So, another instrument that was developed in Africa that was eventually remade here in USA was the banjo. And the banjo is a stringed instrument, has a unique tone to it and quality. And it became eventually very popular in country western music. So here's a song by Rihanna Giddens from her second solo album called Freedom Highway. And the song has a loose theme running through it, showing different aspects of the African American experience. It's set during the Civil War, and the song imagines a conversation between the woman of the house and a slave called Julie as the Union troops approach the plantation. So the mistress begs Julie to protect the family riches, which is in a trunk. But Julie answers, "Mistress, that trunk of gold is what you got when my children you sold." So back then, as the Union troops came and they came onto the plantation, they would free the slaves that were there. And the mistress is, telling Julie, please don't go, please don't give up our treasures. And Julie can't wait to get out of there. So the songwriter Rihanna Giddens is interviewed by Uncut magazine. Says that Julie was the focus for me in a lot of ways, just in terms of who those women are in history who don't have voices, who don't have books written about them or movies made about them. Particularly in the slave experience, it is so often men that are talked about, and their women are the reasons for doing things. Giddens told Uncut about the background to Julie. "I started writing the song some years ago," she recalled. "I read this book by Andrew Ward called The Slave War, the Civil War in the words of former slaves, and I was moved to start writing songs. I wasn't much of a songwriter at that point. I'd written a couple of exercise songs, blues, so whatever, but these songs started to come out of me. Julie was the first one. I wrote it on my banjo. It has been sitting around here for a while until it just seemed like the right time to do something with it." So let's take a listen to Rihanna Giddens' song about a slave named Julie. Okay, back to our music of the colonial time. And this is from battlefields.org. Goes on to say that music of the theater, basically opera, was still based on the British tradition and continued to be so for decades to come. The most popular that was performed in the colonies were called ballad operas. This type of opera was a British reaction to the more formal, stiff, and musically sophisticated Italian operas of the day. Ballad operas were composed of folk melodies and songs coupled together with spoken dialogue, told a comedic story to the audience. It was an opera for the people, not for the rich class who could afford to attend and understand the language of an Italian opera. Perhaps the most famous ballad opera to import itself from the London stage was The Beggar's Opera, a three-act work that included themes of violence, stealing, and laziness. First performed in London in 1728, the smash success debuted in the colonies sometimes in the 1750s. So later, a song based on The Beggar's Opera is called Mack the Knife. And Mack the Knife, or the Ballad of Mack the Knife, is a song composed by Kurt Weill in 1928 music drama, The Threepenny Opera. The song has become a popular standard recorded by many artists, including US and UK #1 hit for Bobby Darin in 1959. So it goes on to talk about the song was sort of a last-minute addition to the Threepenny Opera, and through some discussions between the producer and the writer, the song kind of switched from character to character. So, nevertheless, in 1959, Bobby Darin took the song by the scruff of the neck and turned it into the swing classic widely known today. Unlike the original, which remains in the same key throughout, Darin's version changes key chromatically no fewer than 5 times, ratcheting up the tension. This is from the Financial Times. Billboard ranked this version as the #2 song for 1959. Darin's version was #3 on Billboard's all-time top 100. In 2003, the Darin version was ranked 251 on Rolling Stone's 500 greatest songs of all time. Pop mogul Simon Cowell named Mack the Knife as the best song ever. So, based on that early opera song, we have a modern version that sort of tells part of the opera story by Bobby Darin. So let's take a listen to that. You can find it in the description box below, Mack the Knife. Okay, so in the pre-revolutionary times, through the revolution and a little beyond, after America wins its war, most of the music still comes from England. Now, what many did was they took the lyrics and changed them to an American cultural flavor. But the songs themselves are actually British. And we find this numerous times throughout those years before, through the revolutionary period. So here's an example, credited to be America's first song, was actually written in Ireland as a poem. Hopkinson set the original poem to music in 1759. But it was not published until 1788 in a collection of songs dedicated to George Washington, who was a personal friend. Hopkinson was one of the first American composers. He was also a lawyer, poet, inventor, and painter. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, for New Jersey and helped design the American flag. The lyrics are about a young man who gives up his freedom to get married. Okay, so we're going to play a song that was written by Hopkinson, which was actually that Irish poem. And it's performed by Thomas Hampson. And the name of the song is My Days Have Been So Wondrous and Free. And it's a ballad. And this was written in 1759.